last week? You're doing the same. Great. Okay, so that's a really good foundation story for what we're going to talk about today, because we're still talking about David, but we've moved on a bit, and it's King David. That's what we're talking about, and we're going to pick up the story as he is made king. Well, I've got to get to it with the clicker thing, haven't I? Great, cool. So he's made king, and his first task that he decides to do is to go and get the ark, to go and get it and bring it back right where it should be, right in the centre of his people, his kingdom, sort of physically and spiritually establishing God right at the centre of his people. So that's what he chooses to do first off. But it's a really odd thing. Here it is, the ark. Isn't that an odd thing? It's a whole odd thing to get our heads around, isn't it, the ark? So if you want to bear with me for a few minutes, I'm just going to give the context of what on earth the ark is and why it's important in this story. So, it was a box. Essentially, it was a wooden box made sort of 4 by 2 by 2 feet-ish, made of acacia wood and covered in gold. You can't quite picture it, but picture it gold, overlaid. It was housed, basically, in a mobile temple, like a tent temple, so it could all move around together. So when they were in the wilderness, this ark moved around with the people, and then it came into the promised land. And it was basically, the design of it was downloaded to Moses on Mount Sinai when God gave Moses the Ten Commandments, the rules for good living and life. And this was also when God established his covenant with his people Israel, that I will be your God and you will be my people, and I will love and protect you and be with you if you love me with all of your heart. The amazing kind of commandment. But most importantly, it was not actually God. That was not God itself. It was the full presence of God. It was kind of as close to being God as you can imagine. But it was God being with his people. Like Tim Macy of the Bible Project talks about the ark being like a little bit of heaven kind of downloaded into our world, so that God could be exactly where he always wanted to be, with us. And it's crucial, that. It's the story of the whole Bible, isn't it? Really. And it's like a partial return to the Garden of Eden, where God was with his people. That's what God is always trying to do. And it also kind of points forwards to Jesus, who fully brought us back to being with God through his death. So now we don't need this ark, actually. That's kind of obsolete. We don't need that to draw us to God, because we have Jesus that does it. So, I've lost my thoughts then. So we don't need the ark, we don't need the sacrificial system, we don't need any of that. So in some ways it's irrelevant, but we do have to understand its importance at that time with King David. So it was holy, and it had rules around it to keep people safe. And that's really important as well. And there were sacrifices and rules around its transportation and handling. But why on earth did David have to go and get it? Like, why wasn't it where it should be? So the ark had its travels. Where do I point this? That way? Oh, right.
The bottom on the right.
Oh. Okay. So the ark had a bit of an adventure of its own, and that's another story. I'm actually not allowed to talk about that, I was told. So you're not going to hear about that. That's an irrelevant story in some ways, but it had a bit of a journey of its own, and it ended up in a little town called Kath Speers, and that's where we pick up the story. The thing is, King Saul had failed to realise its importance when he was in charge. Him and his armies had treated it a bit like a lucky charm. They had taken it into battle and thought, if we have the ark, then the enemies will be afraid and nothing could go wrong. But that wasn't what it was all about. It was, the ark kind of brought people to God. It wasn't about the ark itself in some ways. And so, it had been left in that little town of Kath Speers, and this is where we pick up the story. But in chapter 5, just before chapter 6 that we're going to look at, just before King David was made king, all the 12 tribes of Israel came to him, and they all recognised David as king. They all came to him, and this is what they said to him, all the tribal leaders. They said, "And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler." Isn't that amazing? He becomes king, and the people endorse it. They're all behind him. And I think David had a real challenge. He had 2 paths ahead of him here. And he could choose to kind of revel in his kingship and be, be king and rule over people and choose that sort of path of identity, that being his main identity, or we could choose another path, and we're going to have a look at that in a second. So I'm just going to invite Craig up. He's going to read the passage for us in 2 Samuel from 2 Samuel 6.
So the ark is brought to Jerusalem. David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his men went to Baalha in Judah to bring it up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim and on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which is on the hill. Uzziah and Io's sons of Abinadab were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahiah was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, tambourines, rattles, and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nikon, Uzziah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzziah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzziah, and to this day that place is called Perez Uzziah. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed him and his entire household. Now King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God." So David went to bring the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and sounds of trumpets.
Thanks. So in this passage, something went really right, didn't it? And then something went terribly, terribly wrong. And then something went right again. And actually, I thought I was going to talk a lot about what went wrong, all the curveballs in life. But right last night, God gave me a nudge and said, "No, Kath, talk more about what went right. That's actually the most important bit." So if you can kind of park that horrendous bit of the story. Thanks, Dave, for giving me this one. If you could just park that bit for a minute. I will talk about it just for a moment, but I want to focus on what went right. So let's think about that. So, firstly, it isn't project self, it's priority God. Life's not just about me. So this moment where David had 2 choices, he could choose to kind of revel in his leadership, or he could choose something else. And he chose, kind of stepped out of the boat, and he chose to fix his eyes on Jesus. I love that verse that you read, Matt. Chose to fix his eyes on Jesus. Actually, not Jesus at that time, but on God. And that was really important. He decided to pursue God over all things, to the point where he just kind of landed the biggest job ever. And I think it was the most important decision he made, actually, King David. So he goes to this little city, Kirith Jearim, the house of Abinadab, and he brings back the ark. But where in the last chapter all the people had come to him, he now goes and gets all the people. He brings all of whatever 30,000 men and the whole of Israel come together, and they do it as a collective act. And I think that's really, really important. He's not just modelling his relationship and commitment to God. He knows that it's for the benefit of all the people to do this as well. Like, their hearts are really important. It's a real kind of shepherding act, a shepherd king, a servant king act. So while King Saul was really insecure and inward and a self kind of preserving leader, David knew it was never about him. It was always about God and seeking God first. So in The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren, I don't know if you've ever read that, it has this quote: It's not about you. The purpose of your life is far greater than your own personal fulfillment, your peace of mind, or even your happiness. Now, I've had to learn this many times, I don't know about you, but whenever I set out or push out into new things, or even just doing this talk, anything, I have to give myself a little bit of a pep talk. I have to say, Kath, it's not about you, it's about God. You're faithfully serving, you're doing things for him. You know, we have this potential to over self-evaluate, don't we? And that's not what it's about. And these words have always been important to me, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. It's that seek first, and then all these things, that order. So there's a lot in life about kind of self-help, project self, this kind of self-actualization. I don't know if you're familiar with this sort of a Venn diagram, but I think there's something deeply wrong with this, isn't there? Where's our spiritual health? Where's God in that? I get a bit cross with this, because this says that to have optimum to be the best human being, you have to have your best emotional care, mental care, physical state intact. But I think God brings out the best in us. I think putting him first, seek him first, and then all these things are still important, but he gets them in place, doesn't he? It's not all about this inward thing we're trying to do, but it's also about how we then influence others, like David, how our relationship with God has a positive influence on others around us. So, how do we do this? And David modelled this brilliantly, didn't he? He said it's worship all the way. And it said David and all of Israel danced with all their might in the ephod. Now, I googled pictures of this for your benefit, and it wasn't pretty. It was just really horrible. So I decided not to show any pictures of David dancing in a linen ephod. So you'll be very thankful for that. But it was lavish, it was wholehearted, and it was the whole nation. Again, he drew them all in. Again, David was teaching and demonstrated that you come to God through worship, and that's the way to make God centre and king in your life. So Psalm 23 says this: "You are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel." It's exactly what David was doing. And something happens in worship when we lift our eyes, we're drawn off ourselves and to God. Our praises establish God's central place in our lives. It's a really deeply spiritual thing, and it's, again, not about us. Here, God was being enthroned, not David. At his kingdom moment, at him becoming king, he says, no, it's God that's king. And then he wears this linen ephod. Did you catch that bit? So the priestly clothes. So he had taken off his kingly robes at this point and traded them for priestly robes. Now, does this remind you of a moment in David's life where he takes off the armour before Goliath? He says, that's not my identity. And he's not saying here, being king is not what I want to do, but he's saying this act of bringing the ark is a priestly act, and that's actually at this point, that's my identity. That's a bigger identity to have. I want to be that person who puts the spiritual foundations in place for Israel, to put God with his people. And worship does that. It flips things around, and it also helps to see our true identity, I think, as well. Drawing close to God and worshipping him often helps us to see ourselves in God's eyes. We notice God's gaze on us when we worship him. We understand how he feels about us. So I met a friend this week that I hadn't seen for a long time. She's gone to France and she's come back. I don't know, lockdown's done this, COVID. We haven't seen people for a long time, and they've changed, haven't they? Some people have changed. Well, she changed a lot, and I had a very sweet hour with her. And actually what came across really strongly, and she actually said it to me, she said, the thing that made a big difference in my life is my identity with God. That's the thing that's really changed me. It's knowing that, more than my job, more than whatever else that this world would say is important, it's my identity with God. And I think that's really, really precious. Well, you may think, like me, I'm not really a worshipper. That's not me. I don't want to, well, some people do like to dance and worship, in that way, but I can't even sing. I really can't sing. And I can't play an instrument. But that's not what this is about, is it? What does our lavish praise look like? And we can learn from David, who wrote the Psalms, that it has to be real and it has to be honest. It's not always singing. Sometimes it might be a bit foolish, sometimes. So I'm not a fan, I hate to say this, sorry if you love these, but I'm not a fan of greeting card messages. I just really don't like them at all. So I found this one. This is like a condolence card. I think it's quite sweet actually. But my parents famously sent me a condolence card on my birthday. Yeah, that's a shocker, isn't it? Might be why I don't like them very much. But when I go and find,
You like your parents?
I do like my parents very much. I have to admit it. I actually thought it was very, very funny, very funny. But anyway. So when I go for a card, I actually like blank cards. I like to, as hard as it is, I like to write my own messages, and I think that was what worship is. Although worship songs are good, I'm not dissing worship songs, I think they're really important, but they're like a springboard to worship. The psalms and worship songs are a springboard. On the Parenting for Faith course, when they're trying to help kids understand worship, and they're saying when you're in a service and you're with your kids, and they're trying to work out what's going on, this is the sort of language you should use. You should tell them, these worship songs are helping me to talk to God. They're like a springboard. My mind is aligned with God's, and I can connect my heart to Him. And I think that's really important, isn't it? I think we need to tell ourselves that sometimes when we're singing to God. So my most precious time at the moment with worship is when I go to Blaze, and there's this spot in Blaze, and I'm looking at, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's all about, it's not the view, it's nature. And I use these words from Psalm 121. I look to the mountains, where does my help come from? My help comes from heaven, from God, the maker of heaven and earth. And it's my springboard to worship. From that, worship just flows. And that's what worship is. And that's what King David was demonstrating. So now, part 2, I wanted to just mention that terrible, terrible bit when things go wrong. And the thing is, it is important to talk about this actually, because curveballs do come our way, even when we think we're doing really well. So, David was doing exactly what he should be doing, bringing God right into the centre of his people. And Uzziah reaches out, the oxen stumbles, he touches it, the cart, and he touches the ark, and he dies. Well, the thing is about this, the ark shouldn't have been on a cart anyway. The rules in Numbers, God was very clear about the protection of his people, and David had rushed in and forgotten this. The rules back in Numbers 4, it said, no touch, no look, and no cart to do with the transport of the ark. Those were the key rules. But the ark was on a cart, and the cart stumbled. And Uzziah, maybe had forgotten the holiness of God, reached out. And we think that's very unfair, don't we? And it is devastating, but the rules were there for protection. And we get that, don't we? We get rules for protection. I understand, I grew up swimming in pools outside, and when there was lightning, everybody knew you got out the pool. That was dangerous. Nobody questioned it. So rules for our protection are important. So what do we do when setbacks come our way? David's response was real. He was angry, he was afraid, probably really disappointed, very appropriate, but he sort of sweats for 3 months, it says. Sweats away with God for 3 months. And then he sees the house of Obed-Edom flourish, and he realises that God's presence was necessary. Actually, it brings blessing, not disaster. So he gets back with God, he seeks out the scriptures, he rectifies the problem, and he carries on. He doesn't let a setback set him back. And I think we really need to learn this. And actually, when he then goes into Jerusalem, he has another setback straight away. But the thing is, the second setback, he's stronger because he's had that reckoning with God. He's understood again his relationship with God. And so when setbacks come again, he's stronger. He handled it so much better. So I just want to finish by saying that, I don't know your situation. I know a number of people in this room, but I can only guess that we all have to deal with setbacks. We all have to deal with curveballs, pretty horrendous ones, actually, quite often. Sometimes we make mistakes, sometimes they just creep up on us, sometimes our past can cast a bit of a shadow over us. But actually we can learn from David. We can learn to get back on track, get back with God. And David was a forerunner for Jesus. He took the priestly role here to draw the nation to God, and he was called prophet, priest, and king, just like Jesus. And we have Jesus, don't we? And he's made a way through his death to draw all people with no fear at all. There's no fear when we come close to God through the Holy Spirit. And we make him centre and king of our hearts and lives through our love and worship. And he reminds us of our true identity as his cherished people, cherished children in the process. So I'll just finish with one verse, not that one, this one. So let us have confidence then to approach God's throne where there is grace. There we will receive mercy and find grace to help us just when we need it. So let me pray for you all. Dear Jesus, we recognise that there are all sorts of curveballs and all sorts of upsets in life. But Lord, we know that you are the centre. You are the centre of our lives, and we just thank you for that. I thank you that if we keep your kingdom at the centre, you will take care of all these things. That you will be our God and you will love us. Amen.